I hope you are having an excellent start to your Thursday morning. We are here to help make it even better. And this morning is going to be precisely one of those days, because we are doing what we do on a Thursday, which is to get the Burning Platform up and running. This morning it is brought to you, as always, by Nando's. The Burning Platform is your chance to catch up on all the current affairs, all the big stories of the moment, all the things that are happening in South African politics, in the world of politics, in the world of the economy, in the world of society, all the things that affect you on a daily basis. And some of those things which you probably don't even realize will affect you, but will have long-term consequences that are likely to either get in your way or help you along. And I'm hoping it's going to be the help you along kind rather than the get in your way kind. And man, is there a plethora of things we could start discussing this morning. Going to be joined, as always, by Kanthan Pillay. We've got Pumi Mashiho this morning, and we've got you. Your comments and questions are an important part of the Burning Platform, so we don't just talk about the things that we think are interesting. You tell us what you want to hear about as well. You can send us a message on 079-748-2090, or if you're watching us live, you can just comment on the side here, and we will throw your comments into the mix. So, a lot to get into today. I think I want to start off with President Cyril Ramaphosa, he's put together what he calls an economic reconstruction and recovery plan. The DA immediately came out and said it looks more like a Santa Claus wish list. But Cyril says political parties all have a choice. They can either rally behind the plan, or they can spend the next few months in a state of paralysis, tearing it and each other apart. So while we wait for Kanthan to join us this morning.
Which was also echoed by Umntwana Mangosuthu Buthelezi.
That's right.
Yesterday.
You know, we talk about a man. How old is he now? He's 90...
93. No, 90. I think he just turned 90, didn't he?
No. Yeah, he's 91 or 90 or somewhere around there. But the man is...
He's the oldest member of parliament.
By far, but he's an impressive 90. He really is. So he said, and the DA said different things. But what does Cyril say? Well, Cyril says that given the crisis that the country has found itself in, we need to have a plan on the table. He also conceded, the president, that while many aspects of the plan were not new, a more careful reading could show a new resolve and determination to implement the changes needed. But Pumi,
Excuse me, say what? A whole lot of are not new.
Yeah, he says they're not new, but he said there's a new energy and determination behind them. So I know you and Kanthan have hardly, hey Kanthan, you and Kanthan have hardly been big fans of the president, and you don't get swept up.
Not at all. I'm a huge fan of the president.
Okay, you two are the last two at any rally to get whipped up into Ramaphoria. So what do we think of his economic reconstruction and recovery plan? Kanthan, you've just come in hot.
Well, what's different about it from the previous economic and reconstructive plan? You see, as soon as you start thinking about it has to be an inclusive recovery, it means that we're going to go toes up and it's going to be a shit show of note. Because you can't have an inclusive, transformative economic recovery. It doesn't work that way. You have to generate money. And the best way to generate money is by losing regulation. The best way to lose regulation is to stop all of the critical racist theory bullshit. And none of that is happening. You know, this is effectively a BEE path to COVID recovery.
And that's not going to work, in your opinion, quite clearly.
It's never worked. It's never worked anywhere in the world. You can start off on a strong base, and then you can redistribute based on the fact that you get good tax revenue from it. That was the Thabo Mbeki model. It worked very well. Allow the economy to flourish, take the profits that you get from there, tax those profits, and then plow them back into social development. We're trying to retrofit it. We're trying to do equality of outcomes rather than equality of opportunity. And it's always going to kill us. It's going to shoot us right in the groin.
Well, I saw a very interesting analysis by the economist Duma Kubule.
Yes.
After the last week. And the biggest takeout, obviously, as you say, no aspects of it are new. it's a little bit of a robbing. And what Duma said, which I really loved, was it's like robbing Thandi to pay. It's like robbing Thandi to pay Dumi.
Yeah.
And the thing about it, and there are a couple of things to see that are classic Cyril moves, right? The first thing is you have a council. You put together a council, an advisory council, to help us with this particular thing. And what does he do? He has 15 people in his advisory council. 9 of them are professors. So you bring in academics to try and solve a problem that's a real life problem, right?
Yeah, and that's the worst thing you can do, because academics have no real world experience, and usually they're very good at coming up with ideas on paper, but they're totally impractical.
And they also don't always agree with each other.
No.
So they're all going to be in a room together, and they're all going to argue about what is the map. What should this map look like? What does the way forward look like?
But to me, but to me versus what did you say? To me versus Tanda, right? Yeah.
Thandi.
Okay. Yeah. Robbing. Yeah. You see, ultimately, what you can agree upon is that both Tumi and Thandi need to be equally poor. And that's what happens. You see, when you get all of these people in the room, what they end up being able to agree on at the end of the day is going to be the lowest common denominator. And the lowest common denominator is always going to be current ANC policy. You're never going to have the 10th man syndrome. Now, we've spoken about the 10th man in the past, which is the Israeli proposition that when you have 10 people in a room, there's one person whose sole job is to disagree with groupthink.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to the question of the 1967 war, where everyone was saying, no, peace is ahead and nothing bad is ever going to happen. And guess what happened? You suddenly had all of the Arabs ganging up, which at the time was Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and all of them. And they basically attacked Israel. And it was only by a miracle that they pulled off a victory in those 6 days against all of those combined Arab forces. And since then, the idea that you always need to listen to the person who has an opinion that actually disagrees with the view of the majority, based on the fact that the way in which you'll shoot yourself in the foot is by going with the lowest common denominator of the groupthink. And the ANC's method of operation always is they go with lowest common denominator of groupthink. It's all they're capable of doing because there is no individual accountability.
Haven't they tried to say that Tito is that 10th man?
Well, if they listen to him, then he would possibly be the 10th man. But is there a single example of where they've listened to Tito?
Well, he doesn't seem to listen to anyone else either. So there's a bit of a deadlock there. I noticed the EFF on Wednesday, and this is something I didn't know. The EFF got into a complete tiz because they saw that Treasury had given Ranjeni Munusamy a job as political secretary to Tito Mboweni. She appeared in a picture that Tito tweeted. Apparently, she was in the background of in this picture. It was a digital meeting platform of the core MTBPS speech drafting team. And there she was, Ranjeni, who's moved on from journalism back into politics.
Yeah, Gareth,
but why should we have a problem with this?
The state is.
I know. What is that, Pumi?
That's the medium-term budget speech.
Oh, okay. Midterm budget speech. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. But why should we have a problem with this?
I don't have a problem with it. EFF say they have a problem with it.
Yes, but what is their problem with it? They don't want it to work as a journalist. They don't want it to work as a spin doctor. No, people just chill. Yeah, I don't have a problem with Tito, hiring whoever he wants to hire. Really, just deliver on the flipping budget.
Don't you know how cancel culture works, Canton? It's not about you not being a journalist. It's about you not being able to get any money anywhere, so you can be as miserable as the people who are trying to cancel you.
No, they must just sit down. I really don't care. Tito can go out and hire. Let me see now. Sorry, my standards are such that I can't really think of people that I'd consider to be despicable because
So I don't think that
I'm trying to find the comparison.
I don't think
he
that
could hire Jacob Zuma on his advisory panel. I'd be fine with that.
Jacob Zuma is a good example. I don't think that the EFF's in outrage is anything to be surprised by. First of all, that's their general posture in life. Okay, anything that happens, they are going to be outraged by it. If it is not in line with what they want, they are going to be outraged by it. However, what it does allude to is the level of, and we spoke about this in the last hour. It's the level of arrogance with which the ANC treats all of us, right? So on the one hand, we have all this talk about the cleanup that is supposedly going to happen because there is some kind of commission that is going to air out everybody's dirty laundry and tell us who the people that we're supposed to mistrust or distrust are in our society. And then at the very same breath, all of those people, left, right, and center, as they all come out, we spoke about the reinstatement as a regional, as the provincial executive in the ANC, deputy chairperson in KZN, right? All of these people, whether it's Nomvula Mokonyane or whether it's Ranjeni Munusamy or whether it's Zandile Kumete, it doesn't. They don't care. The tone deaf nature of the ANC is that we can do whatever we want and there's nothing you can do about it. So I think that the EFF is kind of going, they're reading the room and they're going, people are going to be upset about this. So we're going to jump on this bandwagon and make everybody upset. Because the last thing we ever heard about Ranjeni Munusamy is that she's dodgy at worst. At best, she's suspect. She's suspicious and sitting on the slush fund of some kind of government spy agency. And now this person is in the inner circle of the ministry. We're like, what the fuck? And I'm just saying. So they're outraged.
While we're talking about people, while we're talking about outrage and people who are dodgy, Justice Lesilo says the following. He says, a take on the Mbalula Twitter meltdown is that maybe the guy isn't scared. Maybe he isn't afraid of Zuma, Ace, and company. I, of course, have said before that I think the opposite is true. I think Mbalula will do whatever. He'll sing for his supper, no matter what it requires in terms of him throwing his dignity out of the window. But what do you think of what Justice says there, that maybe Mbalula is someone who's unafraid now? He feels he can say what he thinks and do what he says. Do you think that that's true?
He is Mr. Fearfokol after all.
Yeah, but I don't think that's true. Kanthan, we've got you on mute. How embarrassing. 10 rand.
How embarrassing. You know, we this is now like the start of the lockdown where people are saying, can you hear me? Can you see my coffee mug, by the way?
Oh, gosh.
I like that. Oh, America. You're getting ready for the elections, Kanthan.
Well, this is it's Throwback Thursday because, you know, if you look at the other side, it has quotes from Obama and from Jacob Zuma.
Oh, okay.
Who were presidents at the time. Yes, we can, from Barack Obama. Together we can do more, Jacob Zuma. There you go.
How did that turn?
Although I do think that the Fikile Mbalula, can I just say that the Fikile Mbalula rant is just smoke and mirrors. You know, the thing about Twitter, which we seem to forget because we are very active on those platforms, is that it's a very small number of people who express their outrage on there, but they have a megaphone in front of their mouths. So there are some 6 million people on Twitter in South Africa, and there are 50 million South Africans. So when you see a Fikile Mbalula going insane with his bots on Twitter, that hardly ever translates to what is happening as he is then on his whistle-stop tour of a taxi. What are they doing? I think he's doing a taxi engagement.
As we highlighted before, the problem with Twitter is that is where journalists all get their news now because they're too lazy to go out and actually find stories. So journalists.
Well, that is the problem with journalists, not Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. But then we all rely, if we're not relying on Twitter, on the journalists, and the journalists in any case rely on Twitter. So it's a bit of an ugly, vicious circle, if you know what I mean.
So, which is a good segue into something that we touched on at 8 last week, Canton.
Yes, I know. Bring that up because
The-
it's something we need to talk about.
The feedback bias of what we see on the internet. So, last week when we were talking about the US election and talking about what the pollsters are saying and who is saying what, I think Canton spoke about how a lot of people are going to be shocked next week, Tuesday, when the Trump train whistles into town, because I think Trump is going to win again. But
Wait, did you just say? Did you say that you think Trump is going to win again?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
Welcome to the club.
I will not be surprised. I mean, I just looking at the tremors on the ground, I think that's what we're going to see. But the thing about it is that for most of us who do get our news off Twitter or off certain news agencies, is one of the things that happens quite deliberately, and we've all seen the Netflix documentaries about it, right? Is you get into a feedback bias where what you search for and what you see, you just get fed more of that stuff. So if you're looking at what the Democrats are tweeting and what the left-leaning news agencies are reporting, all you are going to see is more of that. You've got to be very concerted in your effort to look at both sides of the story and look for what, not just what Fox is reporting, but what Fox and CNN are reporting. If you're going to look at what New York Times is reporting, you've got to look at what the opposite publications are also reporting, if you want to see a full picture. Because the internet is not.
So how do you manage your own? Because this is always, we can talk about this in theory, and I know everybody's kind of on board with the fact that there are these feedback loops. But Pumi, how do you manage to fill your news feed with opinions that you don't already have and with news sources that you wouldn't normally choose? And how much of an effort does it take from you to get a more well-rounded, more balanced approach to the news? What do you actually do?
It's a big effort, but it's part of my job. It's what I have to do every day, unfortunately. But it is a big effort.
If we want to hear a more middle of the road point of view, if we want to hear the extremes of left and right, how do we go about that? Like help people like me who haven't yet cracked the code.
You just have to search for both sides of the story. You just like there are people who don't like hearing how and what Fox is reporting. Those are the people you may not like to hear it, but you need to know it, right? So follow those guys anyway. If you like what CNN is reporting, follow those guys too, but follow the people who are on the other side of the debate as well. That's why debates are the way that they are. You hear both sides of the story because you want to hear both sides of the story so you can make up your own mind.
Yeah, I think that this is probably something which is not going to go away anytime soon either, because there isn't a surefire way to do it. What happens is that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram feed you the kind of stuff you already like. So they're actually working against you. You have to dig pretty deep. I mean, I look at this story with Hunter Biden, and I'd like your opinion on this one. So there's this laptop that gets handed in at a Mac store to be repaired. And the owner of the place takes down the details, and Hunter Biden actually signs, "This is my laptop, and I'll come and get it once it's fixed." So the guy fixes it, and he calls the first number he has. He calls the second number he has. There's no answer. A couple of months go by. He tries again. And this laptop is sitting there. Now, they have a policy that if the laptop is there for X number of months, it becomes your property once it hasn't been collected, so that he can recoup the cost of fixing it.
Correct. It's considered to be abandoned at that point.
Right. So he gathers this laptop together, and he goes off because he sees in his attempts to now turn this into something that he can resell or do something with, he sees, whoa, hang on a second, this is the presidential candidate's son's laptop, and there's a lot of pretty sensitive information on here. So what he does is he actually hands it into the FBI, which is probably the responsible thing to do. He keeps a copy, though, because the FBI obviously don't act on it. And he then sends another copy to Rudy Giuliani and to one or two other Republicans.
But let's be clear, he sent it to the FBI last year.
Correct. And he waited a long time before he sent another one to Giuliani because he was getting no response from the FBI. And he thought, okay, well, they clearly don't see what I'm seeing here.
No, they chose to not see, because remember that the FBI has always been on a campaign for Team Obama.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now Team Biden. But either way, there's pretty damning information on here. I mean, even if we just take the stuff they have revealed so far, and I saw a really interesting interview with Rudy Giuliani in which he says, we're not going to release all the information that we see on this laptop because we want to force the Biden campaign to lie. We want to see how much they think they can get away with before we take out information that proves that they're lying, which will obviously make them look worse. But here's what's happened that bothers me. There's all the Burisma stuff and Hunter Biden, and he says he's going to give half the money to Joe. And I mean, it's at least prima facie evidence of corruption. But let's put that aside. What bothers me is that instead of coming out and saying, either I am not involved in this, which is what Joe Biden should do, I have my hands clean, I deny that this is useful information. I mean, he's only got 2 weeks to the election. Instead, he goes to ground. Joe Biden has been hiding in his basement for 4 days. He hasn't been seen or heard. He was on the campaign trail 5 days ago. He bought 2 ice creams, a chocolate one and a vanilla one, and then he disappeared. And we haven't seen him since. He hasn't said a damn thing about this. His campaign have been trying to whitewash it and say that it's all about the leak, which happens in South Africa whenever the ANC are caught with their hands in the till. People always go, how did you find out? Not, is it true? And this is surely unacceptable behavior for someone who is standing for election in just a few days' time. He hasn't said a damn thing to the people of the country he's standing for election in for 4 days.
Well, he has been avoiding the media precisely because he has to marshal his resources for a debate this evening.
Okay.
It is the final debate that's happening this evening, and we know that he's going to be rehearsing that script until he's blue in the face, simply because he doesn't function very well unless he has a teleprompter in front of him. So that's kind of the simple thing in terms of where he is right now. But, you know, going back to answer your original question just now, Gareth, in terms of how do you actually wade through this morass that we have out there?
Yes, sorry. I just want to put in context. The reason I brought the whole Hunter Biden story up is because the left-leaning media in America have completely ignored this story as if it's a non-story. The same people who told us about the Russian hoax for 2 years running have ignored this as if it does not exist. They don't even put it on page 28. They do not mention it. That's the bias.
Well, is it the bias, or is it actually the instructions that are coming down from the people who ultimately control those companies in terms of how stories are meant to end up getting spun and how they're meant to end up getting put out there? You see, we have this entire thing around this idea that the media is inherently left-leaning in that part of the world, rather than trying to take the very different view that ultimately the people who are funding those institutions and who use them as a matter of propaganda wish to put out particular divisive messages, which allows them to continue to effectively loot behind the scenes in one way or the other, which is really not very different from what the right-wing guys would end up doing at the end of the day. But
and that's the nature of that game.
Yeah, it gets couched in a veneer of respectability. But the thing that actually enables the media in the US in particular, and then by extension the rest of the world, because we tend to lap up media from the US simply because of the fact that there's a language issue. So we will not be listening to broadcasts that come out from China. We will not be listening to broadcasts that come out from Russia. We won't be listening to broadcasts that come out from India. And we will not get into the substantive discourse that's happening in those parts of the world because we are constrained by the fact that the common language for most of us is English. And so the one with the biggest megaphone is ultimately going to be the United States.
So and what do you do? I mean, what are your sources for news?
Well, if you look, I don't know if you've ever taken a look at my Twitter bio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a quote on my Twitter bio. It's a short quote. It says "Justum et tenacem propositi virum," and it's actually a quote from Horace. Going back a couple of thousand years. But but the full quote, it's something like "Justum et tenacem propositi virum non civium prava iubentem non."
What does it mean?
Well, essentially, it means something like a man who is just and resolute will not be moved from his settled purpose, either by the misdirected rage of his fellow citizens or by the threats of an imperious tyrant. That's and you see and the reason why I've got that quote out there is not that it's something that I'm describing myself as, but I think it's something that you need to aspire to be, that you end up not being swayed by the crowds. And the problem that we have right now is that people are so afraid to be cancelled. People are so afraid to be smacked down by everyone else that the only thing that they will say on these public platforms is groupthink. And it goes back to the question of the Ramaphosa advisory committees, because the more people you toss into the mix, the more there's a tendency for all of them to stand and to say, in the words of Orwell, 4 legs good, 2 legs better, 4 legs good, 2 legs better. So ultimately what you need is the ability to actually sift through all of this stuff and actually say to yourself, this makes sense. And then when you draw a conclusion, don't be afraid to draw a conclusion based on the fact that you might be wrong. Because I always work on the assumption that I might be wrong. But the fact that I might be wrong doesn't mean that I must bow to the will of the majority, because ultimately I need to trust my judgment better than I trust the judgment of the mob. And right now the mob is all singing from the same hymn sheet. And as soon as everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet, it means that there's groupthink at play, and there's not much in terms of how people are actually trying to sift through the masses. Now, let me give you a very typical example, okay? I don't know if you guys are aware that Barack Obama made a public appearance yesterday to campaign on behalf of Biden. He held a rally in Philadelphia, a drive-in rally in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, and everyone was saying, yay, Superman is back in the house, we have a grown-up in the room and all of this kind of stuff. And the question that I ask myself, all of the polls are showing that Biden is leading by 14 or 15 points in Pennsylvania.
Double digits, sure.
So why does Obama need to be campaigning in Pennsylvania? Why does Obama need to be? If the Democrats are very clear that their lead in Pennsylvania is so substantial, why are you pulling out the most popular president in the past couple of decades? Was Obama. Let's be very clear about this. Sure. And he is their biggest heavy hitter. And you're pulling him out where? In Philadelphia, which is, again, one of the blackest cities in Pennsylvania. And you're trying to, and what is his focus? He's trying to get black men to come out and vote. Now, what that immediately tells me, and that triggers my bullshit detector, because if the lead is so substantive, they would actually be putting him someplace where he would be able to do something far more effective.
Can I be specific and particular here? Because I know people listen to this show so that they don't get the bullshit. And I need to know in our local media, Kanthan, and this is a difficult thing for anybody to come up with a solution to. But if I asked you, who should I be following in local media in South Africa to get a good idea of not only what's happening in South African politics and what's going on in the South African economy, but also what's happening internationally. Who would you rate these days? Because so many of these media businesses are compromised. So many of them are run by either corporate interests, which have political interests in the same space, or they are supposedly independent, but are exactly the opposite when it comes to who runs the boards. Who in South African media can you trust? Who do you look to for information? Just reliable information, not opinion, because we can all find opinion fairly easily.
Well, I think one of the things that actually plays to our strengths right now is if you consider that broadly, let's just take the print media as an example. Broadcast is completely compromised. There's no one that we can really look to from the point of view of being trustworthy in the broadcast environment. They all sing from the same hymn sheet. But if you look in terms of the print media, right now, effectively, you've got two teams. Well, roughly three teams, but we'll just park the Sunday Times for a second. But you can say that by and large, everything that falls under the Naspers stable, which includes Media 24 and all of those print titles, they are roughly Team Ramaphosa.
Right.
And then you have everything in the independent newspapers table, which is Team Zuma. Okay. Fundamentally. So work on the assumption that if anything is being put out by Team Ramaphosa against Team Zuma, it's probably true. And at the same time, anything that is being put out by Team Zuma against Team Ramaphosa, it's probably true.
Okay. So it's more, I get what you're saying. In other words, find the obvious narrative they're trying to sell, and then figure out what their purpose is, and that'll help you to ascertain how much of what they're saying is actually true. And when it works against their own narrative, then and someone else is reporting it, there may be a kernel of truth in it too.
Right. So we know, for example, that if you look at IOL and independent newspapers in general, essentially they are embongis for Iqbal survey. But
for me,
if
you agree with this clearly.
But if you look at the front pages of the Sunday Independent over the past period, all of the stuff that they've been putting out there has been consistently exposing stuff about Team Ramaphosa that you do not see pitching up on the other side of the print fence.
Right.
And really, that's
more
what.
But more than just about Team Ramaphosa, it's also very much in service of Iqbal. It's very much in service of Iqbal's personal interests.
No, you're absolutely right. But that's not the point. You see, we know that that's our starting point. We know that. Okay, so obviously every time there is something that is writing about Iqbal Survey's business interests or about AO Technologies or all of the companies that he's involved in, then you'll know immediately that this is stuff that is pushing a particular narrative. But when it comes to putting together facts that are talking about what Team Ramaphosa is doing, as opposed to what Team Ramaphosa is saying, then I have every incentive to actually treat that as having a kernel of truth. And then you wade through it, strip out the adjectives, and then you'll say, here's a fact, so-and-so got a particular contract and is related to Team Ramaphosa in the following way. And really, you then expand that view and apply that to almost every media outlet in the world. I follow Russia Today. If Russia Today says anything that Putin's doing is good, I immediately do not believe it. For that reason, I mean, that's their job. I read China Daily.
What are Russia Today saying about the U.S. election? Just because I haven't watched them, and this will give us a very quick answer to whether or not there's Russian interference and who the Russian interference is on behalf of. What do they say about the U.S. election?
Well, they're effectively saying exactly the type of thing that you've just mentioned. They are talking about the Hunter Biden laptop. They are pointing out the fact that there has been this tendency for media to sweep this under the carpet. So in other words, they are doing really what we would expect proper journalists within the United States to be doing on a regular basis. But at the same time, look, I made the point, I think it was last week, that Russia Today has been reporting on our farm murders in our country more accurately than our own media has been doing so. And it's exactly the same bit of logic. Why? Because they have no skin in the game in terms of whether or not they're promoting an agenda. So when it comes to reporting in terms of what happens in this country, they're just doing the appropriate thing, which is to report the facts in terms of farm murders. And if we apply that logic, then we end up being in a good space. And of course, the advantage that we have in this country, and really the same is true in the United States to a large extent, is that there is a thriving independent media community that now exists on various alternative channels.
Yeah.
Well, and if you look in terms of the audiences that they are pulling in. But by the way, I just want to go back to that Obama rally, which took place yesterday. Okay, firstly, he was walking through the streets of Philadelphia and talking to random strangers. Yeah. Just a year ago, you would have had a scenario where he would be swarmed if he happened to be doing that. Now that there was kind of a desultory crowd that was kind of gazing from a distance, but there was none of the adulation that we saw.
But people will say that's because of social distancing and COVID.
Well, I'm sure they would. But then his rally was a drive-in rally, and I've got to tell you, okay, I live fairly close to Woodmead, and I drive past the Macro parking lot there quite often. And I've got to tell you, there were more cars at our Macro parking lot here on an average Saturday morning than they were at that Obama rally. Now, contrast that with watching videos of the rallies that Trump has been holding. For this one rally that he held in Pennsylvania, in Erie, Pennsylvania, there was a 30-mile convoy of cars going to his rally.
Hampton, I mean, this is not surprising because if you ask people who are voting for Biden, why are you voting for Biden? Is it because you're enthusiastic about Joe Biden? They're going to say, no, it's because I don't like Donald Trump. So that almost speaks for itself in that respect. There's no enthusiasm for Biden. It's more, And this is what made me think of what you said the other day. People don't go to the polls to vote against something. They go to the polls to vote for something. But I want to hear Pumi's opinion on this news thing because and there are lots of comments here. Let me just quickly, before we go to you, Pums, just read some of this. So here are some of the things that our listeners this morning choose to read and trust. Tracy says, I trust Mandy Wiener. She also says, I do not trust News 24. I don't trust Adrian Basson, Naspers, IOL, the Sunday Times. Prime Media has a few individuals who seem trustworthy. I can't remember the last time I bought a newspaper or had a news app on my phone. Cabello says, I thought I was the only one who was trying to... Oh, that's about refreshing the page. Brandon says, News 24 is the most biased news source ever. Neil says, lately I go to the Daily Friend, Daily Maverick, and both opinions and slight biases, but I like them. Also, The Morning Shot, which is a Roman, who started off here. And then somebody else says, imagine being as proud of your president as the Republicans are of Trump. That's a whole different thing. But Pumi, who do you listen to, and who do you take your advice and your news from?
So there are lots of different people, and particularly people I may not necessarily like, as some of the people I follow. The good thing about what we have available to us today is the fact that you can choose the individuals that you follow. You don't have to be part of a particular publication. You don't have to be like subscribed to the Sunday Times to follow particular individuals. And the thing is, news is no longer about breaking news. Really, it is now about it's about commentary, it's about opinion, it's about the thoughts behind what people are saying. I read a lot of kind of financial biased stuff, unfortunately for me, because that's where a lot of my world is in. Politics doesn't interest me nearly as much. And because I don't believe that we have enough people, particularly locally, who comment on politics in an even keel, whatever their bias, whether they are right or left. I don't think we have people who comment in an even keel on that.
You follow very interesting people. I've looked, you've got about 500 people who you follow on Twitter. And this is the nice thing about social media too, is you can see what people like Pumi follow there. And I mean, I'm surprised. Here it is in the last couple of people that you've decided to follow. There's somebody from Nigeria who's done a TED talk on happiness. And then there's Dolly Parton. I mean, you really do have
What?
You have a very eclectic mix of people in there.
I'm on the side of Dolly Parton against that bitch Jolene. No matter what.
All right, I love it.
But it's, I mean, there is a, I listened to it. I also listened to a lot because of the opinion factor,
Uh-huh.
because that's the thing for me. In order to be able to distill what you think, you kind of have to take in the views of various things, like Canton says, then there's a kernel of truth. But you've also got to see the lie of the land, what it is that's happening around you as well. So I also do listen to a lot of podcasts. And I listened to an incredibly interesting one the other day, and I just don't remember who it, I think it was on Spotify, about the troll farms, the Russian troll farm, the agency, what are they called? And that was extremely fascinating, because it gives you a view on how things work, so that when you read what you read, when things show up on your timeline, you're able to quickly decipher if you believe it or not. You know, just look at, if it says Daily Vox and you're like, who's the Daily Vox? If it says Vice, you know, you kind of know who it is. If it's Wall Street Journal, you know which direction they're in, or Fortune, or you know, that's, or The Economist. That's what you're looking for, and then you can follow those individuals. So look at the big picture and follow it, and
Yeah.
get both sides of the story. Then sometimes you get interesting things out there.
Yeah,
And you can make up your own mind.
And let's also be fair. It's a more nuanced approach that is the educated way to express yourself, and it is a more nuanced person who has different information channels that they're tapping into, who is able to ascertain the exact lie of the land, as you put it just now, Pumi. Because nothing.
But don't allow yourself.
Nothing is in black and white. Nothing is that simple.
And it's to not allow yourself to be outraged simply because the herd is outraged.
Yeah.
Figure it out for yourself.
Now you're asking a lot, especially of millennials.
Maybe you're not outraged by, you know, those things. Figure it out for yourself. You don't have to be outraged because everybody else or the bots on Twitter are outraged.
Canton, I know you want to hop in here. We've only got a few minutes left. What do you want to throw in?
I missed half of what Canton
you know
was
what?
thrown out the feed.
So okay, here's one of the things that I need to say. You know, Mandy Wiener was a good example just now. If I come across someone like Mandy Wiener, who generally has information that's pretty much fact-based, I do tend to follow. There's a range of individuals like that across much of the media, and one of the reasons why I don't single them out is because I don't want to put a spotlight on them. Because immediately at the point at which you put a spotlight on those individuals, and those individuals are there across all of these media houses, and if you put a spotlight on them, there'll suddenly be pressure on them to actually end up conforming. And so I try to avoid a scenario where I'm doing that type of thing. But I also wanted to just try and highlight another example. You guys have heard of the whole concept of Gedanken experiments, right?
No, tell us.
Okay, well, it's essentially it's a thought experiment, and you know, there's some people who attribute it to Einstein, and I don't remember where the actual origin of it. But the idea is that you propose a scenario, and then you think yourself through the consequences and what the likely outcomes are going to be. So you know, the scientific method actually depends on verification, but
sure.
And you know, Gareth, you have a chemistry lab, and you know the process by which you go through to ascertain what the outcome is if you put particular things together. A thought experiment just does that kind of stuff, but you do it in your head. So as a thought experiment, not so long ago, I wrote a piece that was along the lines of, can Jacob Zuma get a fair trial? Now, the idea...
frozen here.
I'm frozen. I can hear you guys fine. And Pumi, I can...
Sorry, say that again. Because, we just had to start again. Sorry.
Yeah. So
the thought experiment is, and this is something you've done already?
Yes, the thought experiment was, can Jacob Zuma get a fair trial? And the idea around, can Jacob Zuma get a fair trial is, basically gets influenced by the fact that the process by which our court arrives at decisions has to be
what's going on with the internet this
Canton, you carry on. We can hear you. Gareth is trying to figure it out.
Okay, so Gareth is trying to figure it out, but you guys can hear me fine. All right. So if you consider in terms of...
Can Jacob Zuma get a free trial?
No, a fair trial. A fair trial. Yeah, you hearing me any clearer now, Gareth?
Now it's good. This internet is about as unstable as Joe Biden.
I find it interesting that this happens at the point at which I start talking about whether Jacob Zuma can get a fair trial. All right, but let me just take you guys through this process. Okay, our legal framework requires that we find in criminal cases beyond reasonable doubt. Okay, right. It's not the test of balance of probabilities, and balance of probabilities is the test that you would apply, let's say, in a labor dispute. Okay, so if I'm holding a disciplinary hearing, I find on balance of probabilities and I fire you or I clear you. Right. In the case of our courts, the courts need to find beyond reasonable doubt. And if you assign a percentage to that, I would say that it would need to be 80% or better chance that the person is guilty. Okay. But if every bit of information that has been put into the judge's head ahead of time, which in our case would be primarily through the media, is going to whittle away at that percentage because the judge is entering it with preconceived ideas around what happens. And so is there a possibility that by constantly whittling away, by drip feeding preconceived assumptions of guilt into the public consciousness, that there will be a propensity for the judge to potentially find Jacob Zuma guilty, not on the beyond reasonable doubt test, but on the fact that the judge's own bias has been shifted based on the fact that the judge has been drip-fed information already in the media. Now, don't get me wrong on this. Do I think that on the available evidence that Jacob Zuma needs to be in jail? Yes. But the whole idea behind the thought experiment is that you always have to consider the possibility that you're wrong, and you always have to consider, is there another way of actually ending up looking at this? And so I wrote this piece. By the way, if people want to see what this piece is, if you go to contentpillay.com and scroll further down the page, you'll find the piece sitting out there. I wrote it a few months back. But so I pulled this piece together and I offered it around to a bunch of people. So in fact, I wrote this piece, I think, in either June or July, somewhere around that time. And there were lots of publishers who said, hey, I love this. This is a great piece. And I said, well, are you going to use it? No. Nobody wanted to go near it. And finally, independent newspapers, our IOL, picked it up about 2 months after the fact.
Why do you think that was?
Can I just say?
I'll tell you why it was. It's because I actually emailed it to Iqbal Survey and I said, hey, here's a piece that you might find interesting.
Now, Pumi, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. So, Canton, that very logic of yours, right,
yes,
is precisely the reason I just want to, what did Mbulelo say the other day? Circle back to something we spoke about earlier, right?
Yeah.
That very reasoning of yours of saying, based on the available information, you totally believe that Jacob Zuma should be in jail, right? And not so long ago, in this past hour, you also said you wouldn't care if Tito Mboweni were to hire Jacob Zuma into his service, right?
Yes.
And I want to talk about the outrage that we are seeing around Ranjeni Munusamy and what the EFF statement put out. That is precisely the way very few people are able to hold that cognitive dissonance that you have, Canton, where you're able to say, on the one hand, I believe Jacob Zuma should be in jail, and on the other hand, say, I don't care if he gets given a job in a very strategic and important role in this government, right? Very few people are able to hold that kind of cognitive dissonance. And this is the reason we see the outrage that we are seeing around Ranjeni Munusamy, because based on all the available information and the stuff that we've been drip-fed about this particular individual, not just as a journalist, but as her integrity and character, to now find her popping up in a very strategic and key role, which we are all extremely emotional about, because this is the treasury of South Africa, which we have seen plundered over the past couple of years. And now here's a person who we all inherently distrust because of the information that we have been drip-fed about her show up over there. Then you see the level of arrogance with which Tito Mboweni is treating all of us. Not only is he tweeting pilchards and garlic, he's also treating this person that we don't trust as a member of his staff.
Hang on a second. You see, I wouldn't draw that conclusion, because remember that the role in which he appears to have pulled her on is as part of the speech writing team. So she's not there. No, she's not there in a policy director position. Okay, go back to Tito's original tweet, and he said the team that's pulling the speech together. So she's not there in the capacity.
It's not about the policy she directs. It's about
but
the
she's there.
To information that she has. That is the problem that we have.
No, you say I don't have that problem, because we already know what information she has access to. There's nothing that in any way potentially confidential or likely to be leaked that is going to, let's say, upset the markets. Everyone knows the entire playbook that the ANC has right now. I promise you that when that speech is eventually delivered, the Rand will, just basically shrug it off, because the inefficiencies of this administration is already priced into the market. Nobody actually cares.
No, so again,
I use
the words cognitive dissonance, right? It's two mutually opposing ideas living together. And that is why I'm saying to you, for most people, that it is an uncomfortable state to be in. It is an uncomfortable to be in. Your head is going wonky, right?
I want to go to a point that Tabiso raises. Tabiso says, it's interesting, this conversation, because it reminds me of my home. My father would buy all the Sunday papers, and I only realized later in life the importance of that. It also forces you to do your own research. You have to watch E! News, SABC, RT, Fox, CNN, BBC, the works, to get, like Pumi says, a general idea of the lay of the land. So Tabiso pointing this out. I know it became very theoretical.
Give Tabiso a belt. Absolutely spot on.
This is also in the week that, Gareth, if I can just take you back, Hampton will remember this, a day in history. This is also the week that on Monday, the 19th, right, when the apartheid state clamped down on a variety of Black-owned publications and journalists. Right. Very brutally.
Famously, the Sowetan,
because they absolutely understood the role that a journalist with integrity and wanting to not pull the wool over the eyes of people, they understood the power of that person. And that's why they very violently clamped down on all of those people. And for the fact that this remains a contentious conversation.
I know, I love it. We wanted to get our teeth into something this week, and this is a much bigger issue than whether, the EFF are outraged or whether Cyril's recovery plan is going to work or not. Mbulelo said that we should all read a book by Alain de Botton, which is called The News, and apparently this is a really, really interesting book that gives you the insight that you require in order to fully understand the media environment. He says, the aim of what Canton is talking about is to actually lead us to ask better and tougher questions, not to get clear answers. That's very interesting.
That's absolutely correct, because the answers are a moving target, but your ability to ask the appropriate questions at any given stage is what actually helps us grow, rather than, blindly accepting stuff.
But people want
and it's hard work.
Yeah,
it's like the whole question of the mask debate, as an example, Gareth. And we've spoken about this over the past couple of weeks as well. But I'm very clear that if I just simply look at the mathematics of it, masks are not going to make a statistically significant difference.
No.
To anything. But I still wear a mask when I go out.
Yeah.
And, I do that because even if it's a fraction of a percentage, but, in terms of my comfort zone, I don't have an issue around the fact that, the discomfort that I get from wearing the mask versus the minuscule possibility that it'll make a difference if I happen to be infected. So that's the entire idea. That it's your having contradictory thoughts, Bhuvi, coming back to that entire premise.
And it's the hard work of it, guys. The truth of the matter is, if you're not doing the hard work, then and everybody's not doing the hard work, that's why the country's not working. We're all not working. We've got to do the hard work of the thinking. We've got to do the hard work of asking the critical questions. And then we're able to hold really serious conversations, but also we're then able to hold people accountable. But if we're not doing the hard work, then nothing works.
Nothing comes easy. Nothing that's worth it comes easy. So for those people who like to have clear answers and they like to be fed their opinions by sort of a drip feed, which is what Kanthan was talking about earlier, then go for it. You knock yourself out, but don't think you're getting anything of value in return.
You will be led by the nose off that cliff.
Correct.
But the issue really that we have right now is that there are so many people who have entrenched positions which are based on the fact that they dug in their heels so firmly at the start of the lockdown that they have no choice but to actually double down on their positions.
What do we call that? Sunken cost.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. You've dug yourself into a hole and you want to get out of it. So what do? You dig a deeper hole. The
cost of de-escalation is too high now.
Yes.
Before we get out and before we de-escalate the burning platform for today, I know that the US elections have been like this cloud that has hung over all of us for at least the majority of this year. And for many people, even those who are not interested in US politics, they cannot deny that it has had an effect on their lives. Do you think that once November the 3rd and 4th have passed us by, that we will be slightly less overwhelmed by this flurry of political news from the United States, and most of us can resume some semblance of normality after that? Or do you think it's just going to be the new normal, the new way of life, and this will continue to dominate news cycles regardless?
Well, consider, for example, that right now, no one is talking about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Yeah. I know.
Okay, and the reason why I'm convinced that people are not talking about Black Lives Matter is because the polls have shown overwhelmingly that's hugely unpopular with US voters.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now there's an attempt to try and strip that from the public discourse and instead focus on things that are more likely to persuade people that they should be voting for Joe Biden. So, once again, this happens to be a situation where people are trying to sway the conversation of the planet really in a particular direction. After the elections, well, you're going to have for a period this scenario. But the far more interesting thing for me is going to be in terms of what happens in the other elections that are happening concurrently with the presidential election. So there's something like 12 Senate seats that are up for grabs.
Right.
And of course, there's the balance of power in the House of Representatives as well. Now, if you have a scenario where all of those entities tip in a particular direction, so let's say you have Biden winning the House, Democrats winning the Senate, and the Democrats retaining control of the House, then we'll go into a period of news boredom for a while, just simply because there's not going to be any conflict circle that's happening out there. Ditto, if you have a scenario where the House flips in favor of the Republicans retain the Senate, and Trump remains president. But as long as you have a scenario where one of those is in discord with the other entities, then that's going to be the place where the news cycle is going to move to.
For me,
it's going to be very contested. I think it's going to be very contested, and there's going to be lots of legal challenges. Not forgetting the fact that most of those people in all those positions.
Well, you see, remember,
come from legal backgrounds.
Remember the legal challenge
for a while.
But the legal challenge will only come in under very specific circumstances. And remember that the legal challenge has to come based on the fact that you have a state where the margin of error based on votes that have been counted is such that if you add the uncounted votes, is there a possibility that we will tip the election in another direction? So what Pumi's referring to, Kanthan, is that Hillary said the other day, do not concede under any circumstances. So they're going to be fighting guys, American democracy is actually, probably the most resilient political system in the entire world. Really, I keep saying this over and over again, and they actually have those separation of powers. And trust me, there's a possibility that it'll go to the court, but and the courts. But the point at which the courts decide. Remember, the courts decided in favor of Bush versus Gore.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, and Gore conceded.
Yeah. So here, Kanthan, Carol says, Jesus Christ, Kanthan, give Pumi a chance to talk. That came through this morning. And I'm going to finish with Tabiso's point because I think it relates to so much of what we've discussed this morning. Tabiso says he listens to this show because he doesn't agree with much of what Kanthan and, in this case, Gareth think or have to say. Gareth always says it's good to hear the thoughts and ideas of those who you haven't agreed with and still be able to have a beer with them afterwards. So I long for the day where we can have a Burning Platform in studio again and have a drink afterwards. Pumi, thank you very much.
Can we get Tabiso on the show then? Can we get Tabiso on the show then?
Yeah, of course we can. One of the reasons that I'm pleased that Pumi's back on a Thursday is because precisely of what we've been talking about today, that it is good to have a little bit of to and fro, and it became for me a little bit of me and Kanthan agreeing too much on everything. So it's nice to have you back, Pums, and I hope that this will continue for some time. If you have any suggestions for the Burning Platform, of course, you're welcome to send those to us. Just send them to Gareth@cliffcentral.com. Pumi Mashicho, Kanthan Pillay, thank you very much for joining us today. The Burning Platform is brought to you, as always, by Nando's.